Hello, and welcome to the Week 5 lecture. This week we'll be talking a bit about Ntozake Shange's For Colored Girls. We're moving a little bit away from our traditional classic American drama canon to focus on some works that nonetheless had a lot of cultural impact and artistic significance in the time that they were written and have had a lasting impact. So, as I'm talking about this play, I'm going to talk a little bit about its significance in terms of its mainstream success, the cultural and political context and artistic context that it was coming from, and some of the stylistic contributions that this play in particular made to the field of theater. So, first, a little bit about the initial success For Colored Girls. Um, the real significance of this piece when it was produced in 1975 was that it was the first extremely commercially successful work on Broadway that was written explicitly by and for Black women. This piece ran for 742 performances on Broadway, so that is 8 shows a week. For context, the average run of a Broadway show is 131 performances, so it ran about 5 times as long as most shows do, which speaks a lot to its popularity and also the impact that it was having on people, that it kept drawing such big crowds for so long. This is also the first time that we see poetry in kind of its purest form on stage in a popular setting like Broadway. We've moved away from like traditional plays with standard characters and dialogue in a single storyline to this form that is a bunch of different poems spoken by different speakers on stage, spoken by an ensemble of women who sometimes represent themselves, sometimes represent Black women overall. So, a little bit about the cultural and political context of this piece. So, we have a few things happening prior to 1975 that this play is coming out of. First, we've got the Black Arts Movement, which is in conversation with the civil rights movement at the time of the 1960s. The whole idea behind the Black Arts Movement was we were going to be making Black art by and for Black people, using specifically African American styles of music, of visual art, of theater, and of literary arts. So it was this entire movement that it was coming out of, a lot of it based in jazz music and African American vernacular, which the entire play is written and spoken in. At the same time, we've got the women's liberation movement really taking off in the 1970s, which is fighting for women's rights. We've got a rising sense and movement of Black women, particularly fighting for the rights and speaking to the experiences of Black women specifically, who at times had largely been left out of the civil rights movement for racial equality, and also the women's liberation movement, which was largely focused on middle-class, straight white women. So we have this moment where a lot of Black women are coming together to focus on their experiences of the world in all of their joy and also the discrimination that they faced. And we see this quite a bit especially coming out of Ntozake Shange's work and For Colored Girls, with feminist theater companies really taking up this different style of theater. They're experimenting with different forms of storytelling, really speaking from collectives. There was this term called consciousness raising, which was this practice of women getting together and sharing stories from their lives to connect with each other, and also seeing this in a specifically political way. This is around the time that we get the phrase, the personal is political, really rising in our collective consciousness. So a lot of the theater beginning in this time in the mid 70s and very much so afterwards through the 80s and 90s in feminist spaces, we're using a lot of personal narrative and testimony, personal stories to discuss broader social issues that are impacting women, and in this work, specifically impacting Black women. So the stylistic significance of this piece is it's the first time that we have what is called a choreo poem on stage in a very mainstream context. So as you'll read a bit about in Ntozake Shange's introduction to the play for this week, she was primarily a poet, not necessarily a theater practitioner. And what a choreo poem is it's a collection of poetry spoken by a group of women. It's important to note in this play, none of the women are playing specific characters necessarily. None of them are named. All of their names are the woman in whatever color she's wearing. So we have the woman in red, the woman in orange, the woman in brown, the woman in green, the woman in yellow, and the woman in blue. And so we have this kind of experimental style of storytelling where it is poetic and lyrical and incorporates a lot of dance. It's not necessarily a singular narrative. We have a lot of women's stories being woven together. So at once they represent themselves and also the experience of Black womanhood in general in our culture. So you'll read a bit more about the play in Ntozake Shange's introduction to the play, and a bit about her experience creating it with the ensemble that she worked with.